Hello, lovelies. This is Erin McKell coming to you on a Friday night at 10 p.m. I was just in the mood to do a short little Q&A vlog where I invite all of you people who follow me on the internet to ask me questions. It can be about any and everything. And I realized I asked this on like a Friday night, so I was like, probably not going to get as many questions as I normally would. So I promise I will do this again in a more like high traffic time, quote unquote. So without further ado, let's get straight into the questions. So the first question, it kind of comes just for some context off some questions I got yesterday about women who work in the sex industry. Sort of like, are they at fault for objectifying themselves? And I don't think so. I personally think people who are like, oh, they're just objectifying themselves are kind of victim blamers and not looking at the people who are objectifying them, who own these media companies and outlets and such. So that's where this question kind of stems from, just as an FYI. So even if we blame the industry, meaning like the media industry, porn industry, etc., and men who are profiting off of exploiting women, it's not fair to even blame the women, even just a little bit, for choosing to objectify themselves. I just can't seem to understand why it isn't okay to put even a tiny bit of the blame on the women, because some do choose to pose in a manner when they know they're being exploited and they don't care that they are only reinforcing the problem society has. I don't know why I said porn, by the way. I meant like the modeling industry. But anyhow, so I don't think that the women who participate in these kind of practices are necessarily completely naive to what they're doing or not at all aware of the dynamics and problematic things and undertones and themes and culture that they're participating in by objectifying um, themselves in the sense of agreeing, I guess, assuming that they are consenting to posing in this kind of way. So, I mean, I don't think it's really a blame thing personally. I don't look at it that way. I don't look at it as like, oh, it's your fault. You have the blame for continuing and perpetuating this industry. I personally look at it as this is an industry that exists and we've built our society around it to such an extent that it's really hard to avoid. And as women, we've been conditioned to want to participate in this industry. You know, we self-objectify all the time. I've self-objectified before. Does that mean that I am a bad person and am personally to blame for objectification that happens in the media? I don't know. I don't personally think so. I think, if anything, I am more of a quote unquote victim to it. I think we all kind of are, because even though you can choose to participate in it sometimes, and keep in mind, a lot of these things you're talking about are based on coercion, even if you're choosing to participate, you have to consider the fact that there's not always a lot of other options, if any. And the way that we've been socialized and conditioned is to think in this certain mindset and consider ourselves as women to be sexual objects. You know, so just thinking about what that means, we are taught to view ourselves as objects. So, how can we blame ourselves then when this is something that is reinforced constantly? You know what I mean? So, no, I don't really look at it as a blame thing. Could you argue that models who participate in this consensually are perpetuating this culture? Maybe, but I don't think it's that relevant or important. I think the real question we should be asking is, who is creating these scenarios and why is there a demand for it? And what can we do to change this culture? Okay. Do you have any idea how dialogue should be conducted with men regarding feminism? It's a good question. I think it's super relevant now, too. And it's something I've definitely thought about. I've changed my opinion because I used to kind of think that men should be included in every facet of feminism, and I was very open to it. And if anything, wanted to convince men to come on board. But the more male feminists that I've seen, the more I have realized that a lot of them are A, out of touch, B, don't really know anything about the movement, and C, are doing it for their own personal reasons, whether that's to gain some sort of following, whether that's to feel validated, whether that's to internally try to work through some problematic things they've done, so they identify as feminists, kind of like consider themselves a hero and whatever. There's a lot of reasons, but I feel like a lot of them are actually selfishly motivated, and I think that's a huge problem, and we tend to give any male feminist, good or bad, a cookie, just for saying, not even necessarily that they do, saying that they respect women and view them as equals. So, based off of what I've seen in my experience in the last couple of years with this, I think men need to definitely understand what they're doing and where they're coming from, which is a place of male privilege, especially men who are cisgender, heterosexual, and white, which I find is actually a lot of the popular male feminists, quote unquote. They're white, they're able-bodied, they're cisgender, they're heterosexual. They have a lot of other privilege as well as male privilege. And I think that's a huge problem. There's underrepresentation in male feminism of men of different identities, and trans men as well. You don't hear a lot about trans male feminists, and they definitely exist. So yeah, I think the dialogue really shouldn't be on feminists. And I think that's part of the whole thing, is that we shouldn't have to educate people, especially men, about feminism. You should do that yourself. There's so many resources available to you. Go educate yourself. Don't ask me to do it for you. Don't ask oppressed people to educate you about their oppression. That's kind of like social justice 101. So if you don't even know that, you probably shouldn't be doing feminist stuff. And so I think that we need to figure out how or if we should kind of coexist with men in the movement. Some people have argued there should be separate sectors, there should be sectors of feminism kind of devoted to masculinity, and that men should be kind of the ones to champion that. And I kind of disagree with that, because I think that only reinforces sexism, actually, and this whole macho-ness, and looking at masculinity as something women don't have. And yeah, I just don't think it's a good thing. So I personally think that, if men want to be involved in feminist activism stuff or whatever, proceed with caution and use your judgment. I am more of someone who is not necessarily about female-only spaces. I love female-only spaces, but I'm also very open to non-binary and trans folks participating in feminist stuff, and not so much the cisgender men, if you understand what I mean. So, good question. It's something I'm still kind of working on myself, figuring out the answer. But I definitely think that we need to include them if they ask to be, to a certain extent, perhaps, but with caution, and, making sure that they understand what the fuck they're actually doing, and not allowing them to be placed over any woman or anyone else, if that makes sense. Because that's the other thing, is that you have all these male feminists coming out of the woodwork, but women have been saying this forever, and we're not respected for it. And when a man says these feminist ideas that are very basic, they're applauded and given brownie points and shit. And I'm not about that. So it's kind of a long answer, but that is mine. All right, the next question is top 5 tips on how to love yourself. I like this question. I think I wrote an article about this once. I was trying to remember exactly what I said. The first thing I think is to accept yourself completely. So not accepting yourself when you do this, or if you're this, or on this condition, or whatever. Learning how to accept yourself now and really actually doing it, not making your love for yourself conditional, because it shouldn't be. It should be unconditional. And I think that's kind of the foundation, is that you have to accept yourself as you are now, and period. My second tip is to practice self-love and self-care types of activities, because I think that really helps to reinforce these things and to kind of put yourself first and to work on, quote unquote, your relationship with yourself. You should take yourself on dates and stuff. Like, what do you do when you're in a romantic relationship? A lot of those things kind of apply, I think, to your relationship with yourself. Check in with yourself. Even just have a day where you devote it completely to yourself. You don't necessarily do any work or take care of anyone else's needs or wants from you, and you just work on yourself. Maybe starting to journal, coming up with some self-care activities that you really enjoy practicing and that you practice on a regular basis. Learning how to say no, learning how to really enjoy yourself and enjoy your own company and not needing to always be around other people. Stuff like that. So I think that's kind of the second step, is to start doing a lot more self-care and being proactive about that. My third tip would be to explore yourself, actually, and get to know yourself as well as you can. So understand what's blocking you from loving yourself. And you can do that through therapy, you can do that through journaling, you could even simply do that by having an inner dialogue, but I think kind of uncovering some of that stuff and figuring out, like, what is it, what kind of messages and things have I internalized that tell me to not love myself, and then working on those. But I think you kind of have to form a relationship with yourself in some way, or get in touch with your feelings in some way in order to do that. My fourth tip would be to have integrity. And what I mean by that is, you probably know on some level what's good for you, what you want out of life, the steps you need to take to get there, etc., etc. And doing what's best for yourself in the long run is the best way to love yourself in many contexts. So, for example, let's say you have a 5-page paper to write, and it's like the night before it's due, but your favorite TV show is having a marathon on TV. So it's a question, what do? Do you write the paper, or do you watch TV? Or, do you watch TV now and write the paper at 3 in the morning? Or do you write the paper now and get enough sleep? So in that situation, having integrity, looking at what's going to be the best option, what's going to give me the best outcome for myself and my goals and my dreams, is probably going to be writing the paper. It's not the easier choice, but that is probably what's going to get you the best results. So being able to, in those moments, kind of stand up for yourself and say that you're going to do what's not necessarily the easiest, but what is going to be the best for you, I think that's so important in self-love, and something we kind of take for granted. All right, my final self-love tip is to really take the time to explore every facet of your being. And I sort of said this in a way in other questions or in other tips, but really not keeping yourself away from certain parts of yourself, and learning how to love the bad things is really kind of what that means, because there's all of these parts of ourselves that we deny and that we wish didn't exist and try to hide even from ourselves. But they exist, and we need to learn how to love them, because they are a part of yourself, like it or not. And the more you try to hide it from it, the worse it's going to be an inner demon for you, and the more disconnected from yourself you're going to be, because you're disconnecting yourself from aspects of yourself that you view as negative. So, trying to figure out what that is, and then loving all of those parts, even if they're negative. Okay, legitimate question. do you love Orphan Black? What about Orange is the New Black? I need to know, it's important. I actually don't know what Orphan Black is. I think it's a TV show. Haven't seen it, so sorry. Orange is the New Black. I watched like the first episode. I actually wasn't that interested in it. I heard it gets better or whatever, but I don't know. It just wasn't for me. Didn't really think it was that great. I mean, on a cultural level, I think though that it's a show that definitely is doing really positive things. You know, I think having a trans woman, period, and a trans woman playing a trans woman on a show like this is pretty monumental. And, you know, it seems to be very pro-woman and giving women agency and actually giving them decent characters, which is sadly a very uncommon phenomenon within media, you know. And so I think that is definitely a very positive thing. So, you know, I think it definitely has good cultural, it's just good for the culture. Okay, and the last question that I have is, why, in your opinion, are some people anti-feminists? I actually kind of answered this a couple of days ago, but I think some people are actually like proactively anti-feminist, like will stand in front of you and say I'm an anti-feminist, because they are either A, misogynist, like they're just complete bigoted, sexist assholes, and they really do think women don't deserve equality. There are people like that out there, so I think that's A. B, I think, is the group of people who don't understand feminism or have a lot of misconceptions about it that kind of dominate their thinking about it, haven't done a lot of actual research, or just kind of going off of what they hear on TV or see on the internet, and somehow think they're doing a good thing or think they know what they're talking about when actually they think feminism is man-hating or whatever. There's a lot of people like that. So I think that is reason B. Reason C is that I think some people have such internalized depression when it comes to sexism that they're anti-feminists, which is kind of sad, but I think that's actually true. So, in terms of anti-feminists, that's why I think people identify as such. So, thank you to you all who asked me questions. I thought it was really awesome and fun. I really enjoyed answering them. I promise, like I said, I will do this again. And I hope you all have a beautiful evening. Ta-ta!